Ada was sitting on the veranda of her house, enjoying the warm evening air. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. She took a deep breath, feeling the light breeze ruffle her hair. The house she shared with her husband Chidi was cozy and quiet, but Ada felt lonely in it. Chidi was often on the road for work, and his prolonged absence left a void in her heart. At such moments she especially lacked warmth and companionship. She tried not to think about her loneliness, immersed in books and music, but today her thoughts returned to Kofi, her uncle. He was 40 years older than her, but he always remained for her not only a relative but also a wise mentor. In recent months he began to visit her more often, knowing how hard it was for her to be alone. Footsteps sounded in the distance, and Ada turned around. Kofi walked slowly along the path, his figure standing out against the background of the setting sun. He was tall and fit for his age, with silver streaks in his hair that gave him a special charm. His eyes always shone with kindness and understanding, and now, seeing him, Ada felt her heart contract with joy.
Good evening, Ada,
Kofi said with a slight smile, coming closer.
Good evening, Uncle Kofi,
she replied, trying to hide the excitement that always gripped her in his presence. Kofi sat down on a chair next to her, and they sat in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the tranquility of the evening. There was always an ease of communication between them, as if they understood each other without words. But lately, Ada has begun to notice that her heart beats a little faster when he is around, that in his presence she wants to smile more often and longer.
how are you feeling, dear?
Asked Kofi, breaking the silence. His voice was soft and deep, like music that enveloped her and made her feel safe. Ada turned to him, her gaze meeting his.
I'm fine,
She replied, but her voice sounded uncertain. She couldn't hide her sadness, and Kofi seemed to notice it right away.
I know it's hard for you.
He continued, his voice full of sincerity and concern.
You spend a lot of time alone, and it can't help but affect you.
Ada looked at him and felt her eyes fill with tears.
Yes, it's true.
She whispered.
Sometimes it seems to me that no one needs me. Chidi is always on the move and...
Kofi leaned over and gently took her hand.
You're not alone, Ada.
He said softly.
I'm always there if you need to talk or just be with someone. I'm here for you.
Her heart started beating faster. She knew that his words were supposed to bring her comfort, but they only intensified the chaos of emotions that raged inside her. She couldn't tell if it was friendly concern or something more. But his touch felt deeper to her than just support.
Thank you, Uncle Kofi.
She said, trying to control her feelings.
You always know what to say.
Kofi was looking at her, and there was something in his eyes that Ada couldn't immediately understand. His gaze was warm, but there was something else in it, something she couldn't decipher. Her heart skipped a beat, and she averted her eyes, trying to hide her embarrassment. They fell back into silence, each lost in his own thoughts. The evening air was getting cooler, and Ada felt a slight chill. Kofi noticed this and immediately took off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. His gesture was so natural, but it sent a shiver through her body.
Thank you,
she said softly, feeling her cheeks begin to burn. Kofi smiled and ran his hand over her shoulder, as if calming her.
You know I'm always ready to help you, Ada.
He said, his voice warm and affectionate. At that moment, Ada realized that she could no longer ignore her feelings. She looked at Kofi, and 1,000 emotions were reflected in her eyes: gratitude, affection, but also something more that she was afraid to admit.
Uncle Kofi.
She began, her voice trembling.
Have you ever felt that your feelings go beyond what is accepted?
Kofi looked at her, his face serious. He was silent for a few seconds, considering her words.
Yes, Ada.
He finally replied, his voice low but confident.
Sometimes feelings take us to unexpected places.
His words echoed in her soul. She felt that something new had arisen between them, something that changed their relationship forever. She didn't know how to handle it, but she knew she didn't want it to stop.
I do not know what is happening to me,
she confessed, looking at him.
but I feel it. Something more when you're around.
Kofi nodded slowly, his eyes full of understanding and tenderness.
I understand you, Ada.
He said, his voice trembling with emotion.
I feel the same way.
His confession made her heart flutter. She felt the world around her begin to spin faster, as if her whole world had turned upside down. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't resist this feeling, this strange but such an attractive connection that had arisen between them.
What should we do?
She whispered, feeling tears welling up in her eyes.
It's wrong, but I can't control it.
Kofi gently placed his hand on her cheek. His touch was warm and gentle.
I do not know, Ada.
He confessed, his voice full of pain and passion.
But I know one thing: you are more important to me than I could have imagined.
Their faces were so close together that Ada could feel his breath on her lips. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't ignore her feelings anymore. She slowly approached him, closing her eyes, and their lips met in a soft but passionate kiss. This kiss was like an explosion of feelings that they had been holding back for so long. Everything inside her screamed that this was wrong, but she couldn't stop. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and his arms held her tightly, as if afraid to let go. When they finally broke away from each other, they were both confused. Their hearts were full of fear and passion, and they did not know what would happen next. But one thing was clear after this evening: their relationship would never be the same. Kofi was the first to break the silence, his voice low and filled with emotion.
We have to think about what to do next, Ada,
He said, looking into her eyes.
I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to hurt you.
Ada nodded, her eyes full of tears.
I don't know what to do either.
She whispered.
But I know I can't pretend I don't feel anything.
They fell back into silence, each considering their feelings and what they had to do. They knew that a difficult path full of difficult decisions and trials awaited them. But at that moment, under the starry sky and in each other's arms, they felt that they were ready to risk everything for this forbidden, but so desirable love. It's been a few weeks since that first kiss that changed everything. Ada and Kofi tried to live as before, but every moment they spent together became an unbearable ordeal for them. There was a hidden power in their relationship, something they couldn't ignore anymore. Every time their eyes met, a spark slipped between them, filling the air around them with tension. Ada knew that her feelings for Kofi had become much deeper than just affection for a relative. She couldn't stop thinking about him, remembering that evening and their first kiss. A hurricane of emotions raged inside her, from guilt to an inexplicable desire that made her heart beat faster every time she thought about Kofi. Her days had become longer and her nights more restless. She lay in the dark, hearing every beat of her heart, and knew she couldn't ignore what she was feeling anymore. Kofi was also overcome by conflicting feelings. Despite his attempts to remain calm and reasonable, he couldn't forget what it was like to hold Ada in his arms. Her youth and vitality inspired him, making him feel young again. But at the same time, he understood that their relationship violated all possible norms and rules, and it could destroy everything they had. One evening, as the sun was setting, Ada was sitting in the same spot on the veranda where she and Kofi had first kissed. There was confusion in her heart. She knew that Chidi would be back from his business trip soon, and she felt increasingly confused. What would she tell him? How do I explain my feelings for Kofi? She felt like her world was about to collapse. At that moment, she heard a car approaching the house from behind. Ada turned around and saw Kofi. He got out of the car and walked towards her with a determined expression on his face. His gait was confident, but there was anxiety in his eyes.
Hello, Ada.
He began, sitting down next to her. His voice was soft but strained.
Hi, Uncle Kofi.
She replied, trying not to let the excitement show in her voice. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Kofi broke the silence.
We can't go on like nothing happened,
he said, not taking his eyes off her.
I can't stop thinking about you, and it's driving me crazy.
Ada looked at him, her eyes filled with tears.
I know.
She whispered. Beat.
I feel the same way. But what can we do? It's wrong, it's...
Kofi gently took her hand. His touch was warm and soothing.
Sometimes right and wrong are not as unambiguous as we think,
he said, his voice sounding confident. I know it's difficult, but my feelings for you are real. I never thought that I would be able to fall in love again, especially with someone much younger than me. But you make me feel alive. Kofi's words resonated in Ada's heart. She knew that their love was improbable and unexpected, but at the same time she felt that it was real. There had never been such a deep feeling in her life as what she felt for Kofi. She was afraid of these feelings, but she also craved them.
I can't stop thinking about you either.
she confessed, looking at him through tears.
You make me feel special. I'm becoming myself with you. But I can't betray Chidi.
Kofi nodded, understanding her anguish.
I know.
He said softly.
I'm not asking you to make a choice now. But I can't hide my feelings anymore. I love you, Ada, and I'm ready to wait as long as it takes.
His confession took her by surprise. She knew there was something between them, but she hadn't expected to hear it so bluntly. Her heart fluttered at the words, and she felt herself drawn to him more and more. Her breathing quickened, and she moved closer to him to get a better look at his face in the soft light of the setting sun.
I love you too.
She finally said, her voice barely audible, but there was determination in it.
I do not know what to do about it, but I do not want to lose you.
Kofi smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion.
You won't lose me.
He said confidently.
We'll find a way to be together, no matter how hard it is.
Ada felt a sense of relief and joy sweep over her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew that she felt alive next to Kofi. She leaned towards him, and their lips met in a gentle kiss that was full of promise and hope. When the kiss was over, they continued to sit side by side, holding hands, as if afraid of losing each other in this new, unexplored world of feelings and emotions. Their hearts were beating in unison, and they knew that from that moment on their lives would change forever. The next day, Ada woke up with a slight feeling. She knew that her relationship with Kofi had changed, but she couldn't deny that her heart was full of joy and expectation. She felt alive, full of energy and passion, which made her body tremble at the very thought of him. Shortly after noon, Kofi came to her again. He knocked on the door, and when she opened it, his face lit up with a smile. He looked calm, but there was a fire in his eyes that she loved to see.
How are you?
He asked, entering the house and closing the door behind him.
I'm fine.
Ada replied, smiling back at him.
I've been thinking a lot. About us.
Kofi nodded, his gaze never leaving her.
Me too. Me too.
He said.
I was thinking that we should be honest with each other. If we really want to try to be together, we need to understand what it means and what the consequences may be.
Ada felt her heart sink at his words. She knew that Kofi was right, but she couldn't get rid of the fear that was holding her down. She was afraid of losing Chidi, afraid of destroying her family, but at the same time she couldn't imagine her life without Kofi.
I don't want to hurt anyone.
She finally said, her voice full of emotion.
But I can't ignore my feelings anymore. I want to be with you, Kofi.
Her words seemed to resonate in his heart. He came closer to her, hugged her, and they stood there, hugging each other, as if trying to protect their feelings from the whole world.
I don't want to hurt anyone either,
he whispered.
but we have to be honest with ourselves and with each other. I'm willing to do anything to be with you.
Ada nodded, and they fell back into silence, each thinking about the future. They faced many difficult decisions and trials, but they knew one thing: their love was stronger than any obstacles. The next day they met again. Ada invited Kofi for a walk in the park to distract themselves a little and talk about what awaits them. They walked along the alleys, holding each other's hands, and the world around them seemed brighter and more alive.
Do you think we have a chance?
Asked Ide, looking at him hopefully.
I think love always has a chance.
Kofi replied, his voice full of confidence.
But we need to be prepared for any consequences.
Ada thought about his words. She knew that their relationship would not be easy, that they would have to face condemnation and misunderstanding. But she was willing to risk it for this love, for the man who made her heart beat faster.
I'm ready,
she said firmly.
I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm not afraid.
Kofi smiled and bent down to kiss her on the lips.
And I'm not afraid,
he whispered.
because we have each other.
They continued their walk, enjoying every moment. The leaves of the trees sparkled around them, and the birds sang their melodies, as if welcoming their new love. At that moment they felt that they could cope with any difficulties, that their love was stronger than all the obstacles that life could put in front of them. However, deep down, Ada understood that everything was just beginning. They had to go through many trials, make many difficult choices. But every day her confidence in their feelings only grew stronger. She knew that there are times in life when you need to follow your heart, even if it leads to the unknown. In the evening they returned to Ada's house. The sun had already set, and it was getting chilly outside. They were sitting on the veranda, wrapped in blankets and looking at the stars. Ada snuggled up to Kofi, feeling his warmth, and knew that she was ready to go through anything for him.
Do you know that I love you?
She whispered, without taking her eyes off the sky.
Yes,
Kofi replied, kissing the top of her head.
and I love you.
They sat there, enjoying the moment, realizing that they had a long way to go. But at this moment, under the starry sky and in each other's arms, they felt that they were ready for this path. Their love was forbidden, but at the same time so bright and real that they could not, and did not want to give it up. It's been a few weeks since Ada and Kofi confessed their feelings to each other. Their secret romance was gathering momentum, like a storm they couldn't contain. Every day their meeting became more desirable, and every stolen moment became even more valuable. They tried to remain cautious, realizing that their lives and reputations were at stake, but the love that enveloped their hearts overshadowed everything else. Each of their meetings was filled with emotions that they could hardly hide. They met in secluded corners of the park outside the city so that no one could see them. Their dialogues were filled with passion and tenderness, as if they were the only people in the world. One such evening, when they met again in the park, Ada was sitting on an old wooden bench waiting for Kofi. She could feel her heart beating faster with every step he took towards her. He finally appeared from behind the trees, and Ada couldn't help but smile. His presence enveloped her like a warm blanket on a cold night. "Kofi,"
I missed you.
he said, sitting down next to her and taking her hand in his. "Ada,"
Me too.
she replied, looking into his eyes.
Every day feels like an eternity without you.
They sat close to each other, their fingers intertwined, and the magnetic attraction that they both loved so much arose between them again. Ada felt her heart constrict with happiness and at the same time with fear. She knew that their relationship was dangerous and illegal, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. "Kofi,"
I know we need to be careful.
he said softly, bringing her hand to his lips and gently kissing her fingers.
But every time I see you, I forget about everything.
Ada smiled, feeling his words penetrate to the very depths of her soul.
I feel the same way.
She admitted.
I know it's wrong, but I can't lose you.
They fell back into silence, enjoying the moment of intimacy. But the silence was suddenly broken by the ringing of Ada's phone. She shuddered and quickly took her phone out of her bag. It was Chidi. "Ada,"
This is Chidi.
she said, her voice trembling. She looked at Kofi, her eyes full of anxiety.
I have to answer it.
Kofi nodded, releasing her hand.
Of course.
He said softly, trying to hide his jealousy. Ada got up and took a few steps away, holding the phone to her ear.
Hi, Chidi.
She said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Chidi."
Hi, honey.
His voice came from the other end.
I wanted to know how you were doing. I know I've been working a lot lately, and I'm sorry to leave you alone.
Ada felt her heart constrict with guilt. She knew that Chidi didn't deserve to be cheated on. He was a good husband who was just trying to secure their future.
I'm fine.
She replied, trying not to betray her feelings.
I miss you too.
They exchanged a few polite phrases, and Ada ended the conversation and returned to Kofi. She noticed how his eyes darkened with sadness. "Kofi,"
He misses you.
he said, his voice low and serious. Ada nodded, sat down next to him and took his hand again.
Yes,
She whispered.
but I am. I can't lie anymore. I can't live like this anymore.
Kofi understood her feelings, but he couldn't help but feel jealousy and pain.
Do you want to finish with us?
He asked, his voice full of fear. Ada shook her head. "No, I don't want to," she replied quickly.
I just don't know what to do. I can't imagine my life without you, but I also can't betray Chidi.
Kofi understood that they were on a dangerous path. He knew that their love could destroy the lives of many people, but he could not bring himself to leave her. He approached her, his gaze full of determination. "Kofi,"
We'll manage.
he said, his voice sounding confident.
We will find a way out of this situation, even if we have to go through pain and suffering.
Ada nodded, her eyes full of tears. She knew that this decision would change everything, but she couldn't pretend anymore.
I love you.
She whispered, her voice full of emotion.
I can't live without you.
Kofi hugged her, hugging her to him.
And I love you.
He whispered in her ear.
and I will never let you go.
At that moment, they both knew that they had made their choice. Their love was stronger than all obstacles, and they were ready to fight for it, despite the consequences. Their hearts beat in unison, and they knew that from now on they would fight for their happiness, no matter what lay ahead. They spent the rest of the evening together, enjoying every moment. Ada felt her heart fill with happiness and passion when she was with Kofi. She knew that their love was illegitimate, but she couldn't imagine her life without him. Late at night, when they were saying goodbye, Kofi took her hand and looked into her eyes.
I know we'll have to hide, but I'm not afraid.
He said quietly.
I'm willing to do anything to be with you.
Ada nodded, her heart full of determination.
Me too,
She replied.
I'm willing to do anything for our love.
They kissed, and that kiss was full of promise and hope. At that moment, they knew that they were going to have a long journey full of difficulties and trials, but they were ready to go through it together. The next day, they decided to meet in a secluded place outside the city. It was a small cafe hidden among the trees where no one could find them. Ada and Kofi were sitting at a table in the corner, hidden from prying eyes, their hands intertwined under the table. Kofi,
How long do you think we can hide like this?
he asked. Looking at her, Ada thought about it. Her gaze went out the window.
I do not know,
She said honestly.
but I'm willing to do anything to be with you, even if it's not easy.
Kofi nodded, his eyes shining with determination.
We have to be careful.
He said.
I don't want anyone to get hurt because of us, but I also don't want to lose you.
Ada smiled, her heart filled with warmth from his words.
I don't want to lose you either.
She whispered.
You are everything to me.
They sat like that for a few more hours, talking about the future, about how they could keep their love a secret. Their conversations were filled with hope and passion, but also fear of what lies ahead. When they finally left the cafe, Ada felt her heart swell with determination. She knew that they would have a hard road ahead, but she was ready to do anything for the sake of her love for Kofi. They held hands, their hearts beat in unison, and they knew that, despite all the difficulties, they would cope together. Their love was forbidden, but so desirable that they were willing to risk everything just to be together. After their last meeting at the cafe, Ada and Kofi became even more cautious. Every step they took was now calculated, every meeting carefully planned. Their love, although it remained as passionate and all-consuming, demanded more and more secrecy. They knew that any rash act could ruin their lives and hurt not only them, but everyone around them. With each passing day, Ada felt her affection for Kofi grow deeper. Her mind resisted, reminding her that their relationship was unacceptable, but her heart refused to listen. She understood that their love was beyond time and space. She felt that their souls were connected by something unknown and ancient, which defies the usual laws of morality. Every morning, waking up in her empty bed, Ada felt torn apart. One part of her longed for Kofi, longed for his touch and words, the other for the familiar and safe life she led with Chidi. But every day her feelings for Kofi grew stronger, overshadowing all other aspects of her life. Ada and Kofi started dating in the most unexpected places. They chose secluded corners of the park where they could go unnoticed, or drove out of town where no one knew their faces. In these places they felt free, as if the full weight of their secrets remained outside these temporary shelters. Here they could be themselves, passionate, in love, real. Every touch of Kofi on her skin was filled with electricity. When he held her hand or held her close, Ada felt her heart stop and her breathing quicken. She couldn't get enough of his presence, his every gesture, his every look. When they were together, the whole world ceased to exist, and only the two of them remained. Their love was like dancing on the edge of a knife, dangerous, but so fascinating. Every moment together was filled not only with passion, but also with the fear of being caught, exposed. However, this fear only intensified their feelings. The taboo nature of their relationship gave them sharpness and depth, making every kiss, every touch even more meaningful. Ada became adept at hiding her feelings from others. She learned to hide her emotions behind a calm smile when she was with Chidi. But her thoughts kept returning to Kofi. She imagined his hands sliding over her skin, his lips touching her neck. These fantasies were her only solace during the long hours of loneliness when Kofi couldn't be around. Her life turned into a double reality. By day, she was a faithful wife, humble and caring, who performed her duties while hiding her real face. At night, she turned into a woman who lived for passion and secret meetings with Kofi. She knew it couldn't go on like this, but she couldn't imagine how to break this vicious circle. At the same time, Kofi was also struggling with contradictions within himself. He was old enough and wise enough to understand the consequences of their actions. He knew that every moment he spent with Ada was borrowed from their lives, but he couldn't stop. Her youth and energy filled him with a vitality he hadn't felt in a long time. When they were together, he felt young again, as if all the weight of the years he had lived had disappeared. She awakened in him not only passion, but also the desire to be the best. For her sake, he was ready to change his life, to leave everything that was dear to him, just to be with her. But he also understood that their love was an escape from reality, and that reality would catch up with them sooner or later. Kofi began to notice that every time they meet, Ada becomes more dependent on their time together. She increasingly expressed a desire to see him, spent more time with him. In her eyes, he saw not only love but also despair, fear of loss. This bothered him, because he understood that their relationship could not last forever. Despite that, he couldn't give up on her. He was drawn to her like a magnet. Her every look, her every breath made his heart beat faster. He loved her as he had never loved anyone in his life, and he knew that he was willing to risk everything for her. One day they decided to go out of town for the whole day to spend time together away from the eyes of others. They chose a small house in the woods that belonged to one of Kofi's old friends. There, among the trees and the tranquility of nature, they could be themselves. This day has become special for them. They walked through the forest, holding hands, smelling the fresh earth and trees. Kofi took some sandwiches and a bottle of wine with him, and they had a picnic in the clearing. They laughed, talked, and every moment spent together was filled with joy and happiness. When the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. Kofi lit the fireplace, and they sat down on an old sofa, covered with a blanket. Their bodies were pressed against each other, and Ada felt her heart skip a beat at the proximity of Kofi. She couldn't imagine that she had ever felt such strong feelings. Every kiss, every breath he took made her forget about everything in the world. This night became for them a night full of passion and love. They surrendered to their feelings without thinking about the consequences, enjoying every moment together. Their bodies moved in unison, their hearts beat to the beat, and at that moment they felt that nothing could separate them. But even in that moment of happiness, Ada knew that reality would return. Their relationship was like forbidden fruit, sweet, but so dangerous. She knew that one day they would have to make a decision that would change everything. But while they were together, her heart was full of love, and she couldn't think of anything else. Returning to the city the next day, Ada felt lost. She knew their love couldn't last forever, but she couldn't imagine her life without Kofi. She wanted to be with him forever, but she knew that it was impossible. Their relationship was like a burning fire that couldn't burn forever. With each passing day, Ada became more and more aware that their love was on the verge. They couldn't go on for so long, but she couldn't imagine her life without him. She knew that a difficult choice awaited them, but she was ready to fight for their love to the end. As Ada and Kofi's relationship continued to develop in secret, tensions grew. Every day they spent together reminded them that their happiness was hanging in the balance. Both understood that secrets could not last forever, and the longer they continued, the greater the threat of exposure. Despite all the caution they showed, reality was inexorably approaching them. Doubts began to creep into Ada's heart. Every time she returned home, she was greeted by Chidi, her husband, who became more suspicious every day. He noticed a change in her behavior as she became more withdrawn. She was often distracted and seemed to be somewhere far away, even when she was next to him. He started asking questions that Ada was finding it increasingly difficult to ignore. One evening, when Ada returned home later than usual, Chidi was waiting for her in the living room. There was concern mixed with uncertainty in his eyes. He knew something was going on, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Ada tried to behave as usual, but her heart was pounding with fear. She knew her world was about to collapse, but she didn't know how long she could keep it a secret. Every day she spent with Kofi brought her closer to the moment when the truth would be revealed. And this moment came unexpectedly. One day, Chidi decided to follow Ada when she said she was going to meet a friend. He felt that it was a lie, and his suspicions increased. He followed her through the streets, watching as she drove further away from the city. When he saw that she was meeting Kofi on a secluded road, his heart ached. Chidi stopped the car from a distance and watched as Ada got out of the car and rushed into Kofi's arms. He felt his world collapse in an instant. All his fears and suspicions turned out to be true. Chidi couldn't believe his eyes. He saw how Kofi gently hugged Ada, how they merged in a passionate kiss, and his heart was filled with anger and pain. Chidi couldn't help himself. He ran out of the car and walked towards them, ignoring the fact that he was shouting. Ada and Kofi recoiled at the sound of his footsteps. When they saw him, their faces turned pale. They realized that their secret had been revealed. It was like a flood of words and emotions. Chidi shouted at Ada, demanding an explanation, not believing his eyes and ears. He couldn't understand how she could betray him, how she could start a relationship with his own uncle. His screams were a mixture of anger and pain, and he couldn't stop. Ada stood in confusion, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. Her heart was torn between two men she loved, but in different ways. She felt guilty and ashamed for betraying Chidi, but also unbearable pain at the thought that everything would be over now. Kofi also stood in silence, his face pale. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready for it. He understood that their love had destroyed everything they knew, and that now they would have to face the consequences. Chidi could no longer contain his pain. He rushed at Kofi, and a scuffle broke out between them. Ada screamed, trying to separate them, but the men were overcome with rage and despair. At that moment, everything that once seemed so important became insignificant in the face of pain and betrayal. Their struggle ended only when their strength left them. Kofi, out of breath and shocked, looked at Chidi, who, exhausted, knelt down, staring at the ground. Ada stood between them, her heart torn apart. She didn't know what to say, how to justify her actions. All she could do was cry. Chidi, breathing heavily, looked at Ada with such pain in his eyes that she felt her heart literally break. He didn't say a word, just got up and left, leaving her alone with Kofi. After Chidi left, Ada and Kofi were left alone on a deserted road. Ada felt the weight of her actions fall on her. She knew it was the end of her marriage, the end of her quiet life. She threw herself into Kofi's arms, feeling despair wash over her. Kofi tried to calm her down, but his own heart was filled with pain. He knew that their love had ruined the lives of many people, and now they had to deal with the consequences of their actions. He hugged Ada tighter, knowing that now they would have to make difficult decisions. They spent the rest of the day in silence, knowing that their world had changed forever. Their love, so strong and passionate, brought them not only happiness, but also unbearable pain. Now they had to deal with the consequences that this love had brought, and they knew that a long and difficult path to forgiveness and healing awaited them. When evening came, Ada and Kofi returned to the city. There was silence in the car, each of them immersed in their own thoughts. Ada felt the weight of the upcoming conversation with Chidi, but she also knew that she could no longer live a lie. Her heart was full of pain and remorse, but she also felt strangely relieved that the truth had finally come out. Kofi was beside her, his hand on her knee, but even his presence couldn't calm her down. She knew that their love had ruined everything, and now they had to face reality. They knew that they would have to accept the consequences of their actions, and they understood that their path to happiness would be long and difficult. That night, when they returned to the city, Ada realized that their lives would never be the same. Their love was powerful and passionate, but it also brought them a lot of pain and suffering. Now they had to find a way to move forward, despite everything that had happened, and try to build a new life out of the wreckage of the old one. After Chidi left, Ada and Kofi were left alone with their love and its consequences. Their worlds, which used to seem so clear and predictable, have turned into chaos. Every decision they made now bore the imprint of secret passions, broken hearts, and inevitable pain. They knew that their love had caused a lot of suffering, but despite this, they could not bring themselves to back down. They were on the verge of a new beginning, but difficult trials awaited them ahead. Ada understood that her life would never be the same again. Every day was filled with memories of the past and the struggle with the present. The house she lived in with Chidi became a place full of ghosts of their bygone days. Every room, every detail of the interior reminded her of what she had lost and what she had destroyed. Her heart was filled with bitterness and guilt, and every step seemed heavy and slow. At first, she tried to avoid meeting people, knowing that everyone around her would condemn her for what she had done. Her friends and family were shocked when they found out about her relationship with Kofi. Some turned away from her, considering her act inexcusable. Others tried to understand, but could not fully accept her choice. Ada felt the world around her turn cold and hostile, and her only refuge was Kofi. He became her island of safety in this stormy ocean of condemnation and misunderstanding. Every meeting with him was like a breath of fresh air, like a ray of light in the dark. He hugged her, comforted her, filled her heart with warmth and confidence. But even these moments of happiness were overshadowed by feelings of guilt and pain. They knew that their love was unacceptable to others, that it had ruined the lives of many people, but they could not give it up. They clung to each other like drowning people to a lifeline, knowing that without this feeling they simply would not be able to survive. Their bond grew stronger every day. They began to build their new reality away from the eyes and ears of those who condemned them. Ada moved from the house she once shared with Chidi to a small apartment on the other side of the city. This was her first step towards a new beginning. She knew she couldn't go back to the past, and she decided to start over, no matter how hard it was. Kofi also made an important decision. He realized that he could not continue to live a double life. He had to make a choice: stay in his familiar environment, among people who knew and respected him, or start a new life with Ada, despite all the judgments and difficulties. He chose the latter. He knew that he would lose a lot: family, friends, the respect of society, but he also knew that he could not live without Ada. Her love had given him a new purpose, a new passion for life, and he was willing to risk everything for that feeling. Their new lives were full of challenges. Financial difficulties, lack of support from loved ones, condemnation from society, all this has become their new reality. But they dealt with it together. Every morning, waking up next to each other, they found the strength to continue. Their love was like a bonfire that warmed them even on the coldest days. She gave them strength and faith that they could overcome any obstacles. Ada started looking for a job to support herself and Kofi. She knew that she could no longer depend on anyone's help and had to be independent. She found a job in a small gallery where she was not known or judged by her past. It gave her a sense of freedom and a new beginning. She became more confident in herself and her abilities, realizing that now she is responsible not only for herself, but also for their future with Kofi. Kofi also began to look for new ways for his creativity. He has always been an artist, but after everything that has happened, his work has become even more profound and emotional. Every painting he created was a reflection of his inner struggle, his love for Ada and the pain of loss. These works began to attract attention, and soon he received an offer to exhibit them in one of the city's prestigious galleries. This became a sign for him that their love, despite all the pain and suffering, brings not only losses but also new opportunities. Over time, people around began to get used to their new reality. Some still avoided them, considering their act inexcusable, but there were also those who saw something more in their story. They saw the strength and determination of two people who chose love despite everything. This love, although forbidden, became a source of inspiration for them. But their happiness was still fragile. Ada and Kofi understood that they had to be prepared for anything. They knew that the past would not let them go so easily, and that they still had many trials ahead of them. But every time they looked into each other's eyes, they saw not only love but also faith. The belief that their feelings were real and worth all the sacrifices. They were getting stronger every day. Their love had overcome many obstacles, and now they knew that they could cope with any difficulties. They learned to appreciate every moment they spent together, knowing that nothing lasts forever, but also realizing that they did everything to be happy. A few months passed, and Ada began to feel that their lives were finally starting to get better. She had learned to accept herself and her decisions, and now her heart was filled not only with love for Kofi, but also with self-respect. She knew that she had made a difficult choice, but she also knew that this choice was the right one for her. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their new apartment, admiring the sunset, Ada realized that she felt real happiness. She turned to Kofi and saw that he was smiling too. Their hands intertwined, and at that moment she realized that, despite all the difficulties, they had found their place in this world. Their love, having gone through trials and sufferings, became even stronger. They knew there were many more challenges ahead, but now they were ready for them. They decided to go forward together, hand in hand, without looking back. After all, now they knew that their love was not just an outburst of passion, but a real bond that could withstand any test. With each passing day, Ada and Kofi became more and more convinced of the correctness of their choice. Their love grew deeper, and they realized that, despite all the obstacles, they had found each other. And that was the only thing that mattered. Their hearts, despite all the trials, remained full of love and passion, and they knew that together they could overcome everything.